Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. To this day.
Nino Brown Boxing, I'm back in the building. Shout out to the LDBC. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. All right, man. Obviously, right now, it's a lot of talk about the whole Gary Russell and Devin Haney situation. But I'm going to stray away from that for a second. And I want to talk about Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. Because if it wasn't for the whole Terence Crawford not fighting any one situation, or Terence Crawford not being able to immediately get this fight with Errol Spence Jr., I don't even think the Gary Russell and Devin Haney talks right now, how popular it is, it wouldn't even exist. So it brings me to something that's been on my mind for a significant amount of time. And right now, everyone, when it comes to the welterweights, everyone's talking about mandatory. They're talking about Sean Porter being the mandatory and this sanctioning body and that sanctioning body for Terence Crawford for one and the IBF for the other or some shit like that. Or the WBC, I believe. I know he's in the WBO ranked number one. I forgot the second one. But, and then it's the whole conversation of Danny Garcia and Errol Spence. Obviously, that fight is signed, sealed, and delivered, and it's coming up. It's going to be on pay-per-view in November. But this is the part that doesn't make sense to me. As I reflect back on Terence Crawford's journey to become undisputed, it was a guy by the name of Sergey Lipinets that was the IBF mandatory, and he was the guy that was in the way of undisputed at 140, and he was the one person trying to keep Terence Crawford from facing Julius Ndongo to become the undisputed champion at 140 pounds. And the narrative at that point in time was unification trumps mandatory. Unification trumps mandatory. That's all I kept fucking hearing. I hear it in the heavyweight division, in the whole Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua situation. Every single time AJ had a mandatory, the topic was unification trumps mandatory. Unification trumps mandatory. So when it comes to the welterweight situation right now, let's just forget about Manny Pacquiao and that WBA belt, because Manny Pacquiao, he's gonna do what the fuck he wanna do. But when it comes to the WBC, the IBF, and the WBO, it's a lot of talks about this guy has a mandatory, that guy has a mandatory, Bud has mandatories, Earl has mandatories. But none of the people that were screaming unification trumps mandatories in the past, they're not screaming it now. I understand that people have taken issue with Terence Crawford and he's not facing anybody. Shit, I don't like it either. But the one thing Terence Crawford has always been consistent on is that he wants to face Errol Spence. Last I checked, that's a 3-belt unification fight. And the only other way that's going to happen again at the welterweight division, if Manny Pacquiao steps up and faces Errol Spence, he's on PBC, and Manny Pacquiao clearly has not taken that opportunity. So to me, at this point in time, we say we want undisputed, we want unification bouts, we want the best fighting the best. Why isn't anyone screaming unification trumps mandatory instead of pushing for Sean Porter or co-signing the Danny Garcia fight? The shit is ridiculous to me. I understand Sean Porter is a great fight against anyone. Same for Danny Garcia. I mean, basically same is for Ugas and Keith Thurman and all of that shit. But right now, in the welterweight division, unification trumps mandatory when it comes specifically to Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. So my question is to all the fight fans out there, why isn't the narrative of unification trumps mandatory is the primary focus when it comes to 147? Because if that narrative is continuously pushed, that pushes us closer to one champion in the welterweight division, having 3 belts. The score is settled with the whole Errol Spence Terence Crawford situation, and we know who's the better between the two. And we can continue to push forward. Either the winner tries their best to go after undisputed and face Manny Pacquiao, and if that's not the case, the winner goes and do whatever they want to do with their career. But it just seems like when we get to a point where the welterweight division is extremely close to achieving some good shit, the whole unification trumps mandatory narrative in the actual fact that unification does trump mandatory, it's not talked about anymore. The shit doesn't make sense. I just find it very convenient that that's not the topic of discussion. Terence Crawford wants to face Errol Spence, and all the fans are always here is we want unification, we want undisputed, want like Wilder. The people reciting Wilder quotes, one champion, one face, one name. We saying all of that, but when it comes to the welterweight division, now we want mandatory fights. Like, this shit's wild to me. That's just my take on the guys. It's Nino Brown Boxing. Shout out to the LDBC, and I'm out.